Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Lee from Lifeline Alarm Systems. I'm sure you know what we do. We're involved in electronic fire and security design and installation. And I think you'll agree that Gary is a very, very scary person to know, which makes him Lifeline's new best friend. But what we're going to look at now is probably just a little bit more about the physical aspects of security. Obviously, Gary's touched on the data element and the control of data, the protection of data. But let's just look at a few examples and areas that we can just, hopefully just trigger some thoughts in your minds and think, oh, actually, that affects me as a business, or actually, we've got that, or that happened to us. See, security is a basic human need. It's the second item up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the development or the requirement to have a sense of safety and security. So it is our basic human need. And every day, millions of people up and down the UK are spending time developing and putting hard effort into building a business. And the UK thrives on SMEs, and none better than the Isle of Wight community, because here, based on the island, we've got some amazing SMEs that are very entrepreneurial. They work in fantastic markets, globally emerging markets, local markets, but this is what everybody is going to work for to build their businesses. So if we're investing that much time and effort into our business, then surely we want to be able to protect it. And the reason we're looking at these is, first of all, we want to try and develop a security culture. That means that we want everybody to buy into it. We want the whole company to be part of the security culture. It means we may need to get IT involved to develop security patches and protection. We may need to get HR involved, as Gary mentioned. We may need to get other people involved to communicate all of that out to our staff. We then want to be able to look at areas of risk. What is at risk within our business? Who's at risk? What parts of the business are at risk? Then we look at some common mistakes, and finally we just touch on deterrent, detection and intervention. Let's just look at the Isle of Wight for a moment. Artworth worth £20,000 stolen on the Isle of Wight. Ventnor Arcade trashed in the burglary. And we just go on. Jewellery stolen. Thief steals safe. Police investigate £10,000 Yarmouth robbery, and we can go on and on and on with just various different elements that have hit our news locally within the last 8 to 9 months. The latest one, we saw cash stolen in an armed robbery in Shankly, and who would have thought that here on the Isle of Wight we'd have 2 armed robberies within the space of 3 weeks? And while we're doing this, a bit of community service, does anybody recognise that man? Wanted for armed robbery.
Gary.
Same build, isn't it? Yeah. So these are the areas we're going to look at. Now, in the UK, 51% of all UK SMEs have been targeted either by or been the victim of fire or crime in some way. That's more than half of the SMEs in the UK. 75% of those businesses did not have adequate precautions in place to prevent that from happening, to detect it, to do something about it. Now they're interesting statistics. So we've got more than half of SMEs that have been targeted by crime. 3/4 of them didn't have adequate precautions in place. This is the scary one. 100% didn't think it would happen to them. Nobody thought that they were going to be the subject of crime or the victim of crime. So how does that equate to the business community? Well, over a business lifetime, these are the estimated costs and impact on a business. It's expected that a business over the course of its lifetime will have 4 incidents of burglary, each one of those costing just over £13,500. £50,000 over the course of a business lifetime. That's quite a chunk of profit. It's expected that there'll be 7 incidents of theft, either by internal. Now, average cost of those are £22,000. Now, don't forget these are average, but you know,
7 times £22,000. Again, we add that to the £50,000, we're getting into some serious figures. And 20 incidents of external theft will most likely take place throughout a business lifetime. Throw that on the floor. Now, they're relatively comprehensive figures that we think they are going to have an impact on businesses. So having now broken the remote, 33% of all UK SMEs, because of their previous experience, now fear that there will be a repeat attack. It's actually a Home Office statistic, certainly on domestic burglary, that if you've been broken into once, unless you take some kind of drastic action or preventative measures, then the chances of you being broken into again within the next 6 weeks increase up to 6-fold. A, because the intruder knows his way around, he feels comfortable. Secondly, his information gathered on the first one. Thirdly, it's quite possible you would have replaced what he's stolen with new versions. So these are very, very daunting facts, very real facts. 42% of all those SMEs said they experienced a loss of income, and 66% of those said that they consider fire or security or breach in security or some kind of major threat to their business, to the performance and success of their future business. So it's a very, very real area that we're addressing. And as we've already covered, none so much so than here on the Isle of Wight. So let's look, just a brief area of concern. Now, this may trigger some thoughts for many of you. Unmanned reception areas. I've actually seen a lot of businesses here on the island, and a high percentage have an unmanned reception. You probably visited some yourselves. And it's maybe typically between a changeover between morning staff and afternoon staff. Maybe it's the lunch hour. And there's a little sign there that says, press button for attention. Well, if I don't want to draw attention to myself, I won't press the button. Now, what's available to me in a common reception area? Well, one of the areas we've got there is possibly a screen that's already been left with data left on it. As Gary alluded to earlier, the example on the train where a laptop's been left. There's also a visitor book. I can get a lot of information from a visitor book. Who's authorised to come and go from the building. I know people have used it certainly for marketing, to find out who's been in, who their competitors were, and other data. There's also data ports that you'll find in a reception area. Now, there was a company recently that commissioned an organiser to come in and find out what they could about the company, data-wise. And they said, you will not breach our firewalls. You won't do it. And they gave them a certain period of time within which to do it. And the way they did it was they turned up early for a pre-planned appointment. So, for example, I'm here to see Mr. Smith at 2 o'clock, and they turned up at 12:30. And they said, well, you're a bit early. So, okay, can we wait? Yeah, wait in here. And they put them into an unmanned office. And in that unmanned office was a data port. And that data port, they plugged an RJ45 connector in, a patch cable, uploaded the data they want and left. And then submitted a report back to the MD, and he said, well, you didn't turn up for your meeting. He said, we've got everything we need. We uploaded all your data from that point. So who do we know is going in and out of our buildings? We've got coats and handbags that may be left, so that's personal security. Who's got access into the rest of our building? We have a due diligence as well as directors and as officers of companies to make sure that we know who's on the building premises, just in case of fire, an emergency. So who's got access? Who comes and goes? Now, we want to try and harden the target as well. The police use this term, hardening targets, or the onion layer, and it's really just peeling away areas to harden and make it more difficult for people. And that could be things like fire doors. You know, fire doors left open, as have been mentioned earlier. It's propped open, somebody wanders in, who's got access to your building? Then we look at things like closing up procedures, access to the building, shredding confidential papers. As Gary alluded to, I do confess to, we were employed by a company once to investigate and find out what information we could about them as a company and what breaches they had. And the first thing we went to was their skips. And pulled out the skips, we found confidential data, industry secrets, customer databases, we found directors' salaries, we found appointment letters, all of which we presented at board level, and the meeting was cut quite short very quickly, saying, thank you, let's not go into that any more detail, please. But that's quite serious data. So where is that data going? Parking areas, rear entrances, cleaners. Many companies employ cleaners and then trust them to close up the business at the end of the day. Well, who are the cleaners? What credentials? What security arrangements have they got? Do you know that they've actually set the alarm system when they've left? Well, there's methods in place that we can put in that, again, companies can be alerted if the alarm hasn't been set by a certain time. So there's many, many areas that we can investigate. So what we're trying to do really is prevent these things from happening. We're hardening the targets and stopping it from happening in the first place. Now, some of the many areas that we look at, I tried to think of a very, very inert business, something we may consider to be quite, should we say, it's not a high-tech data business. It's a hairdresser's. That's not the one I go to, by the way. Mine's a bit fancier than that. Yeah, they take extra time now. I pay them extra. So we take a hairdresser's. Now, what would happen if an intrusion were to happen in a hairdresser's? First of all, we've got to break in. Now, that's unpleasant. So the hairdressers now have lost cash. They've lost stock, they've lost tip boxes, and typically October, November time, early December is when hairdressers are hit as targets because tip boxes are quite full. The girls have collated all their cash throughout the year, and they're looking to spend their £200 or £300 in tips that they've earned at Christmas time. And very often those tip boxes are left on site. Then there's the reputation of the business. Did you know so-and-so's got broken into? Did they? Have they survived? No, they've gone out of business. You know what it's like on the island. Yeah, bad news travels really fast. We're now going to get the glaziers involved because we need to replace some windows. We need a locksmith because the locks have been tampered with and we don't know who's got keys. We've now lost data and bookings because out of sheer devilment, not only did they take the cash and the tip boxes and a bit of stock, they took the bookings book as well. Didn't mean anything to them, but out of just devilment they did. So now we've got to deal with the insurance company and any subsequent costs involved there. Scenes of crime officers and forensics are now on the place, dousing the place in aluminium dust. We've now lost the whole day's income at least. There's the mess to clear up. There's the staff morale. There's the cancelled appointments, but we can't do that now because someone's stolen the bookings book, the appointments book. So now we've got customers turning up. That is a very, very basic thought and a scenario of a break-in that happens at a very, very low-risk business. Now multiply that by your business and we get some idea of the potential damage and impact that an intrusion can have. Sadly, this is the thought of many island businesses, not you, because you're here this morning. We spoke to some, and when we invited to some of our businesses, or some businesses, shall we say, to come along to this event, it's very, very important. Some of the replies we got were, no thanks, we've already got one. Okay. Another reply was, oh, it's just another one of those networking events, isn't it? And I think another reply we had was, we don't believe in the cloud. Okay. So what are the threats, the concerns, the areas, the risks? It won't happen to me. 100% of those previous victims said it wouldn't happen to them. It's the Isle of Wight, it doesn't happen here? Well, it does. We've seen that quite categorically by the news cuttings. Only happens to big companies. Well, again, it doesn't. We see it happens to lots of all types of companies, large and small. It's never happened before. Well, the farmer said that when his donkey dropped dead. It's never happened before. What am I going to do? We're insured. Well, I'm sure John Heather will be really, really pleased to talk to you about your insurance from NFU, but what's that going to do? Is it actually going to put your business back on track? Is it going to stop all of those previous things that we've addressed? Interesting point, actually. Fines that Gary was talking about. The CPS were actually fined just under £250,000 for failing to keep interviews with victims secure. And this said they had laptops that were stolen in a burglary, and it involved 31 investigations, mainly of crimes that are being committed of a violent sexual nature. Now, all these things were recorded on these laptops. The videos were then edited by a film company who was a third-party provider to the CPS. However, the studio that the film company used had insufficient security. It had no alarm system, it had no access control, it had no CCTV. The laptops were stolen, the data was breached. The CPS were fined £200,000 for that loss. This is a thought. A lot of people think, well, you know, it's not that serious, so I can patch it over, or I can put a bit of a sticking plaster over a gaping wound. I've got a mate who can do something for me. He knows about computers, he knows about firewalls, he can do this, he can put an alarm in for me. Maplins do security cameras. Yeah, they do. Yeah. Ask Maplins why they don't use their own security cameras to protect their own stores. B&Q do alarm systems. Well, ask them the same question. Why don't you use your product to protect your stores? We've got nothing worth stealing. Everybody has got something worth stealing somewhere. And we'll get one off the internet. Yeah, the whole great, wonderful world of the Internet of Things is going to be there as our saviour. Well, it's not. We need to look at this as individual businesses, as individual organisations, look at the risks involved, see how we're going to be able to negate them. Because these guys are professionals. They know what they're doing. So the people we employ to counteract them, the measures we need to put in place also need to be professional as well. Now that's evident by the fact that you are here this morning. You're listening to these presentations. You're taking on board the points from Gary and also the ones that Jonathan will bring up a little later. Jonathan will give you some real life examples of data breaches and issues that have affected people locally here on the island. But target hardening may include things like cameras. It may include lighting. It may even just be as simple as looking at the doors, strengthening up the doors. It might be fogging systems because they slow intruders down. It might be alarm systems, it may be access control, it could be window film, it could be even gates. There are all sorts of areas in which, as companies, we could look to try and harden those targets to move somebody else off somewhere else. Because at the end of the day, an intruder is opportunist. And if we've got 5 properties in one street and one of them is protected, who's at risk? What were the other 4? So please, you know, we're working hard as SMEs and as business owners, directors and trustees to make sure businesses are really working hard to reinvest back into the island. Let's not become a victim of these areas. We want to detect. Once we've done that, we want some kind of intervention, whether that be the police, whether it be a security company, whether it be a guard, whether it be your key holder, whoever it be. But let's get some detection in place. Let's get some intervention in place, because all the detection in the world without any intervention is useless.